Alright, hello everybody, welcome to our next lesson here. This is Victory in Europe. This is for our unit, or the unit World War II. So our objectives and standards: to describe the events before, during, and after of D-Day, and analyze how the war in Europe ended during World War II. And please take a moment here to read over the standards. So our desired result, again, think about this as we're going to the lesson because this kind of ties to your question at the end there. But how did the war in Europe come to an end? So the Allies were planning how to liberate France and Western Europe from Nazi control. And this military operation becomes known as Operation Overlord, and is going to be commanded by American General Dwight Ike D. Eisenhower. That's a picture of him there. Now, there's going to be a secret attack. So Eisenhower has nearly 3 million Allied troops to prepare to attack. Most of these are going to be British, American, and Canadian forces. There's going to be some other countries involved as well. We also have some French resistance fighters, which are going to be involved in this as well. But for the most part, most of the actual fighting will be done by British, American, and Canadian forces. Now, the plan is to attack Normandy in northern France. But to confuse the Germans, Eisenhower is going to use fake materials and radio messages to make it appear that the attack would happen somewhere else. You can see in this picture here that these troops are moving an inflatable tank. So from the air, if a German plane was to fly over, over top of this, it would look like it was a real tank and troops stationed somewhere. But of course, this was just like Hollywood effects, basically. And Hitler actually takes the bait when he learns of this and prepares his troops for a landing miles away, at the French port of Calais, which is 150 miles away from Normandy. Now, the attack was supposed to happen on June 5th, 1944, but bad weather postponed it. Eisenhower told the troops then to attack on June 6th, the following day, 1944. And this will become known as D-Day. After midnight, paratroopers are going to land behind enemy lines to clear the way for troops later on that morning. My great-grandfather actually was a paratrooper who was part of this, so I have kind of a personal touch to this, which is kind of neat. He was part of the paratroopers that actually landed behind enemy lines prior to the invasion of France. Now, when the American troops and British and Canadian troops are going to land on the beaches, they're going to run into obstacles that the Germans had placed on the beaches. These big metal kind of barriers, so the tanks or boats or trucks couldn't really drive on the beach. So these are going to become an obstacle for American troops as they do the landing. Also, they had these high cliffs. The Germans had high cliffs with these big cement, like pillboxes almost, these big cement buildings that they could fire down on the soldiers on the beaches. So this was not going to be an easy task by any means for the Allied forces to land here. Either way, thousands of Allied troops are going to land on the beaches in northern France. It is the largest land, sea, air operation military in history because we used airplanes, we used boats, and we used obviously foot soldiers and tanks and things like that. So it's the most massive military kind of engagement in history. Now, despite this massive amount of troops and the surprise attack, the Germans were able to fight back with brutal force. Like we said, they had those barriers on the beaches. They're able to be sitting high up on the cliff and shoot down. I actually went to Normandy, France, and have been on the beaches there, and it is pretty, it's not the same layout as it was obviously then, but still pretty impressive to see how these soldiers did this. Now, fighting will be fierce, and many lives will be taken on both sides, but the attack is a success. The Allies are able to push the Germans back, and they're able to capture the beaches, and they're able to push further into France. So here's some pictures here. On the left-hand side, you'll see this is obviously part of the operation with the boats, the airplanes, the troops, the tanks. This is obviously after the fighting took place, but you can see how much military force was used. On the right-hand side shows you a map that planned out how this was going to lay out. So you have the U.S. 82nd Airborne and the U.S. 101st Airborne, which we said the paratroopers landed behind enemy lines prior to the invasion. And then you'll see that the American forces actually worked that they divided this northern coast of France into different areas. They called it Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. The Americans landed at Utah and Omaha Beach, Omaha being one of the more famous spots of the fighting. Gold and Sword were taken by the British, and then Juno was taken by the Canadians, and you also see the British 6th Airborne Division over there as well. So moving forward in France, so the Allies landed 1 million troops in France following D-Day. Now General Omar Bradley is going to unleash a massive land and air bombardment that's going to divide the German lines. After that, the Third Army under General George S. Patton is going to advance towards Paris. And on August 25th, 1944, American and French resistance fighters are going to liberate Paris from German occupation. That top picture there shows American troops or Allied troops in France, and obviously the French people waving and celebrating that they've been freed from German control. The Allies are going to free France, Luxembourg, and Belgium by September of 1944. And the good news overseas is going to help re-elect President Roosevelt to an unprecedented fourth term in November of 1944. That poster there says register and vote Democratic. Roosevelt and Truman, Harry S. Truman, will be Roosevelt's vice president for lasting peace and security for all. So Roosevelt will become elected to a fourth term as president in November of 1944. Now, Hitler is obviously not going to take this too well. In October of 1944, Americans are going to begin capturing German territory. They're going to begin to start to push into Germany a little bit. Hitler is going to respond by ordering his troops to break through the Allied lines and break their supply system. Hitler is hoping that the German troops will kind of split the Allies in half, so that way they're kind of thrown off and they can't communicate, in hopes that this will kind of, set Germany back up for some victories. He hopes that this will slow them down and also break their spirits as well. So the last offensive, on December 16th, 1944, German tanks are going to break through the Allies' line and create a bulge that split American-British forces. See how we have this in the map here. You'll see how the German forces moved in and were trying to divide, the British and American forces. You see how they're it looks like a bulge. It looks like a big bubble. So this becomes known as the Battle of the Bulge. It is a final attempt by an attack by the Germans. The Germans actually used English-speaking German soldiers to throw Allied troops off as well. Maybe they'd pull up and say, "Hey, how you doing?" And the German-speaking or the English-speaking German soldier would tell them to go a different direction or move them a different way or even attack them. So the Germans were pretty, they were desperate, but they were also pretty smart to try to do what they did here. You can see that it lasted from, on the picture there, December 16th, my apologies, until January 28th, okay? It lasted an entire month and resulted in actually Germany being pushed back. So even though the Germans have some success with this, in the long run, it's going to do some damage to Germany. The German military is also going to lose a lot of its troops and a lot of their supplies during this kind of final attack as well. As Allied forces pushed into Germany from the east, Soviet forces are going to push in from the west. So Allies coming from the east, Soviets from the west, they're kind of closing in on Germany. And as they do this, the Allied soldiers are going to discover the horrors of the Holocaust and many death and labor camps. Before fleeing these camps, German officers had attempted to destroy evidence of terror by the Nazis. They actually even, in some cases, forced prisoners to march out of the camp in the cold snow, and many of them died in these kind of, horrific marches. Some of them tried to massively execute the rest of the victims. Some of them left them there just to starve. But soldiers found bodies and personal items of the victims, but they also found many survivors, people who were very skinny, lost a lot of weight, sickly, but either way, this will kind of also symbolize an end to the Holocaust and an end to kind of Hitler's terror as well. On April 25th, 1945, the Soviets are going to enter Berlin. They're going to begin bombarding the capital of Germany. Hitler actually kind of orders a last effort. He orders every able-bodied man in Berlin to fight for Germany, and we're talking elderly men and even young teenage boys, kind of being told to grab weapons and defend the city. Not really going to help. And many of them are actually not going to participate as well. Many of them know that the end of the war is near. In an underground bunker, Hitler is going to marry his longtime companion, Eva Braun. In his final letter, Hitler writes in it that they will not face capitulation, or they will not surrender. And on April 30th, 1945, Hitler shot himself, and she will commit suicide as well by taking some poison. A week later, Germany is going to surrender to General Dwight D. Eisenhower, and VE Day, or Victory in Europe Day, was celebrated on May 8th, 1945. Unfortunately, President Roosevelt did not live to see the end of the war in Europe. He actually had suffered a stroke on April 12th, 1945, and died. So it will be up to then now President Truman, who was Roosevelt's vice president, to finish the war in the Pacific. Because now that the war in Europe is over, we'll begin to focus on kind of sending more troops over to Japan to take out our other enemy. And that picture there shows you some celebrations that were going on with VE Day. All right, so please try your best on the questions that follow, and I will talk to you guys soon.